You recently resigned as the counterterrorism director over the war against Iran, and I thought a good place to start would be why you think the war against Iran was a mistake.
As I said in my resignation letter, I believe that Iran posed no imminent threat to us, as in Iran was not on the cusp of attacking us. Since President Trump came back into office, we watched, and people with access to just the internet can verify this, we watched the Iranians observe a very calculated escalation ladder. They stopped their proxies from attacking us as they were attacking us under the Biden administration when Trump came back into office. They sat at the negotiating table with us up until the 12-day war and Operation Midnight Hammer. Once Operation Midnight Hammer was complete, now mind you, during the 12-day war, they didn't attack us at all. Once we attacked them and hit their nuclear sites, they responded by firing an equal amount of missiles as we dropped bombs.
Every single time the U.S. gets dragged into a Middle East war, somebody in D.C. swears this one is different. This one is necessary. This one can't wait. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and now Iran. Joe Kent spent years as a special forces operator watching guys die for wars that made zero strategic sense, and he's got a pretty specific explanation for why Washington keeps falling for the same con. It's not stupidity. It's not even bad intel. It's a very organized, very well-funded machine that knows exactly which buttons to push to keep the regime change factory running. Every time Iran fires a missile or launches a drone, cable news goes absolutely nuclear, pun intended, acting like Tehran just handed Putin a wedding invitation to World War III. But ask yourself something pretty basic. If Iran actually wanted war, why do they keep stopping? Like every single time, they fire, they make noise, and then they pump the brakes. That's not how a country acts when it's trying to burn everything down. Joe Kent didn't read about this in some think tank report. He ran special forces missions across the Middle East for years, which means he watched Iranian behavior up close, not from a green room on Fox News. So when he lays out a pattern where Iran climbs the escalation ladder one rung at a time and then backs off once they've made their point, that's not a theory. That's a guy describing what he actually saw. The official DC story is that Iran is this unhinged, fanatical regime that could go full crazy any second. And the only thing standing between us and chaos is more sanctions, more threats, maybe some airstrikes. Kent disagrees pretty hard with that framing. What he describes instead is a government that runs a very deliberate, calculated pressure campaign, where every move is measured against what they can get away with and what would actually get them destroyed. Walk through the actual pattern and it gets pretty clear. After the 12-day war, Iran retaliated against Israeli strikes and then pulled back. After Operation Midnight Hammer, same thing. They fired enough to make a statement and then stopped. That's not a country swinging wildly. That's a country with a playbook. They respond to Israeli military action. They don't just randomly decide Tuesday is a good day to start Armageddon. Kent's read on this is that Tehran's moves were always a reaction to what Israel did first, not some deep, burning hatred for America specifically. So when Donnie Diapers and his blob of foreign policy ghouls frame every Iranian missile launch as Iran coming for us, they're conveniently skipping over what lit the fuse in the first place. It's like getting mad that your neighbor called the cops after you threw a brick through his window. Iran's real muscle isn't a nuclear weapon. It's the Strait of Hormuz, where something like a fifth of the world's oil flows through a stretch of water you could practically swim across. Add ballistic missiles, drones that cost almost nothing to build, and a whole network of proxy groups scattered across Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. And Iran can make life genuinely miserable for Gulf states and US bases without ever officially starting a war. They know exactly where the line is, and they stay just behind it. And then there's the 6 months from a bomb thing, which at this point is basically a running joke that nobody in DC will admit is a joke. Iran has been 6 months away from a nuclear weapon for roughly 20 years now. The timeline keeps sliding because keeping the panic alive is the whole point.
At a very empty quadrant on a base in Qatar, and then they immediately got back to the negotiating table with us. The only imminent threat, as Secretary Rubio said, was from the Israelis. The Israelis attacked Iran, and we knew that during this iteration of the war, that the Iranians would understand that this was an existential threat to their regime, and that the goal would be regime change, and so that they responded by retaliating against us. But again, this whole series of events wouldn't have taken place if the Israelis would not have attacked. So there was no imminent threat. And I also am just against us getting involved in yet another regime change war in the Middle East. I'm not a fan of the regime in Iran. I understand they are a terrorist threat, especially from my portfolio and my perspective as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. However, using a regime change tactic that failed in Iraq, failed in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, that to me was just a recipe for disaster. But it was exactly what...
An Iran that's always almost nuclear is way more useful to certain people in Washington than an Iran that either has the bomb or definitively doesn't. The panic doesn't generate itself, though, and Kent has a pretty detailed map of the machine that keeps producing it. Most people picture lobbying as some guy in an expensive suit sliding a check across a table, maybe winking, maybe not. What Kent describes is way bigger than that. It's a full system running through Congress, intelligence channels, think tanks, and media outlets all at the same time, and he calls it a very sophisticated layered approach that Israel has spent decades getting really, really good at. Kent doesn't frame this as some shadowy conspiracy where a secret council of guys in robes controls the world. He frames it as a highly effective influence operation that any country with enough money and motivation would run. And Israel runs it better than almost anyone because they've had decades to refine it. Their grip on Congress, as Kent puts it, is well documented. And it works because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously, not just one. The part that actually moves policy isn't the PAC money, though the PAC money is real and it flows pretty freely toward candidates who take the hardest line on Iran. What Kent calls the in-run is where things get genuinely interesting. Israeli officials skip the formal US intelligence process entirely and go straight to senior decision-makers with urgent, alarming briefings. Stuff like Iran is within 2 weeks of getting a bomb, delivered directly. No CIA review, no vetting, no pushback from analysts who might say, actually, that's not quite right. Think about what that means for a senator who's got about 45 minutes between votes to understand the entire Iranian nuclear program. An Israeli official walks in with a scary, specific story, and the CIA's official assessment says something totally different, so who wins that argument? The guy with the urgent warning wins every single time, because the scary story is simpler and the access feels exclusive. Kent points out that the standard US intelligence review process is pretty rigorous, so bypassing it isn't an accident, it's the whole strategy. The think tank layer runs parallel to all of this, pumping out papers and op-eds that keep hammering the same idea. Enrichment equals a bomb. That's not technically accurate, because uranium enrichment for civilian energy and building a nuclear weapon are genuinely different things. But it sounds terrifying enough that most Congresspeople just absorb it as fact and move on. Kent watched this shift the entire American red line from Iran can't have a nuclear weapon to Iran can't enrich uranium at all, which is a massive change in policy that happened mostly through repetition, not through any new intelligence. Once that narrative gets baked in, any American official who floats the idea of a diplomatic deal with Iran gets tagged as soft on nukes, which is basically career poison in DC. The PAC money and campaign access then work as a reinforcement loop. Candidates who push the harder line get support, candidates who ask uncomfortable questions don't. And over time, the number of people willing to publicly challenge the Iran threat narrative just shrinks and shrinks. Kent also watched something pretty telling happen in real time. Every time Trump publicly pushed for de-escalation to open talks, Israeli officials responded within hours by launching strikes on new targets, specifically to keep the conflict moving and prevent a deal that might cut them out of the equation entirely. So it's not that Washington is getting fooled by bad intelligence. It's that the pipeline delivering the scary story bypasses the people whose job it is to check whether the scary story is actually true. Kent's core argument is pretty simple. Iraq went sideways, Afghanistan went sideways, Libya turned into a full chaos festival, and Syria handed Russia a warm water naval base it's been wanting since forever. Every single regime change attempt made things worse and handed strategic wins to China and Russia, not America.